Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros conversation about aligning enablement and operations for scaling organizations, sponsored by the team at Brainshark. Really excited about our panelists that we have here today. And before we jump in, Sheryl, Danielle, and Beverly, we have a little bit of a tradition on Modern Sales Pros. We usually ask kind of a fun or silly question. What I want to know about each of you, and Sheryl, let's start with you on this. Where are you excited to visit now that the world's starting to open up a little bit more?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Richard, because I am super excited about a trip we have planned for September. We're doing a French river cruise from Lyon to Avignon. It's a wine-based cruise, and we're going down the river.
That sounds, is there room for
super
3 more? I think Danielle and Beverly and I would love to join.
Come on board. I'll give you the number of our travel agent.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. So we've got a wine river tour. Danielle, how about you? Where are you excited to visit as the world's starting to open back up?
Honestly, I'm excited to go to our London office, which sounds silly, but we have a killer culture. So going to our London office is always kind of like a mini holiday for myself. And I learned just before the pandemic, unfortunately, that I should be doing like midweek flights and doing a long weekend somewhere because it's much easier to get to really cool countries from the UK than it is from the US. So I'm excited to get back into that flow a little bit more as we start traveling some more.
Oh, that's exciting. Good European trip always cures what ails you. And then last but certainly not least, Beverly, where are you excited to visit now that the world's starting to open up a little bit more?
We have a trip scheduled to Montana, and we're going back to nature. I'm going to do some fly fishing, some rafting, out hiking. So that's on our schedule. I'm very excited.
Oh, that's awesome. That all sounds really, really fun. I think if we can't talk about aligning enablement and operation, I think we should just talk vacation plans too, if we run out of time.
Richard, where are you going?
I'm just excited to travel again. I have no destination in mind. I lost the Super Bowl prop bets with my girlfriend, so I have to take her to Nassau in the Bahamas. But I'm a sore loser, so I'm waiting to push it off. I'm going to try to go double or nothing on something else. So with that, folks, I'm really excited about today's panel. I think it's exciting. It's an illuminating topic, and it comes up a lot. Early stage operations oftentimes takes on part of what enablement does. Early enablement gets taken on by a lot of what ops teams and sales engineering and all that. Today we're going to try to demystify as much of that as we can. Today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Brainshark. But as I mentioned, today's session is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who aren't members or maybe new to the community, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales enablement, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to help our community members answer questions they may otherwise struggle to solve on their own and see around corners they may not even know are coming up. We do that through bringing together amazing panelists like Sheryl, Danielle, and Beverly. We do that through our great online forum, really robust discussion there. And hopefully in the near future, getting back to our in-person events where you get a great opportunity to meet other members of the community and talk about some of these challenges live. Community is about 22,000 and growing members, and you have representation from across these organizations and about 6,000 others. So it's not just one perspective, you get perspectives from across the board. Everything we do is free for our members, and you all will be invited to join afterwards if you're not. And if you enjoy today's content and you enjoy our speakers, you can actually see both Sheryl and Danielle at next month's Revenue Excellence Summit, affectionately titled "The Funnel is Dead." One of the things that we've seen and a trend that's starting to happen, especially with the pandemic, is organizations need to be even more customer focused than they were before. You need to start to design your processes customer in as opposed to function out. We're going to be exploring that concept through all different lenses over 3 days in July. This is a choose your own adventure, so you can join for just one session, you can join for all 9 and everything in between. We just announced our speakers this week, and next week we're going to be announcing our super awesome, well-read, well-known keynote, a little bit of a sales historian. So that's your clue for that. We're going to be announcing that person next week. But enough about modern sales pros. We have a great relationship with the team at Brainshark. We've been working with them for going on 4 years now. And Beverly, thank you for the sponsorship, but I'd love for you to share just a few words about Brainshark with the audience.
Sure. So what I love about Brainshark is, I am a sales enablement practitioner in a sales enablement company. So it's sort of this double-edged sword. For those of you that aren't familiar with Brainshark, we are a sales readiness tool. And as a practitioner, we all know that it's not enough just to train people. We want to make sure that people are confident in having those effective conversations to move our sales deals forward. And that's where our focus is on at Brainshark, and that's what our platform can help you out with.
Awesome. Thank you, Beverly. And let's actually dive in to learn a little bit more about our speakers here today. I'm excited to have each one of these folks on, but we'll give them a chance to introduce themselves, starting with Sheryl. Sheryl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Sheryl Busk. You can read that on the screen. I am the head of enablement for a techie company called Infoblox. It's a wonderful company, and I have an amazing team of 11 globally distributed people in my enablement organization. And I will tell you that if I had to describe myself, I'm what you get when you cross a math and engineering geek with a cheerleader. It's my best description of myself.
I think that's a first. That's a very acute. We'll see if that shines true here. Danielle.
I was gonna say that's some stuff to follow. Danielle Murkey, I am the VP of RevOps at Zappy, which is a consumer insights platform where we help enterprises really bring their product and ideas through innovation to understanding how that resonates in their markets through advertising and shelf space. So revenue operations at Zappy is much more around that systems process optimization. And we actually spun off enablement, which I think we'll get into a little bit of that during this discussion. So it's interesting. We just went through that in a scaling org. So really excited to jump into this combo.
Hi, and as mentioned, I'm Beverly Heyman. I'm the Director of Sales Enablement at Brainshark. Don't have as good of a pitch as Sheryl has, but as far as my background, I was in sales for about 15 plus years, and then for the last 4 have been in this sales enablement role.
I'm excited to have our panelists here today. And just one housekeeping note before we jump into the content today. Please do use the Q&A panel for any questions that you have. That helps us keep the questions flowing at a comfortable pace for our panelists, and it also gives our panelists a chance to follow up with you afterwards. You ask a great question, maybe Sheryl, Danielle, or Beverly have something they want to give back. Also, the first question that's asked, is this being recorded? When will the recording be available? Yes, it is. And yes, the recording will be available. Typically shows up on the Modern Sales Pros YouTube channel about 24 hours after the event and on our post-events page with all the key takeaways. With that, let's jump into it a little bit. So when we did our prep session with the team, we came up with a couple of key concepts that we want to talk about. For folks here live, this is meant to be interactive. We've got 3 amazing practitioners pretty much till the top of the hour. If you have questions, please do ask. We'll do our best to get to those. But we're going to talk about each one of these topics and try to explore it fully to help you and your organization understand how to align enablement and operations, how to set them each up for success, and really how to figure out how to kind of work these 2 important high leverage groups. And with that, here's the topic area that we're going to go through, but let's just jump right into this. Beverly, in the early days when you're thinking about operations and enablement, how do those 2 disciplines kind of shake out? How much enablement work is operations doing before you kind of bring on an enablement person?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what tends to happen is you have this one operations person that's, identified early on as the default person. And they tend to be that ambassador for, sales training and building sales processes. And when I think about that person, across different organizations, I would say, that person has a good pulse on sales and they like working with data and they understand the challenge that companies face tied to sales cycles and efficiencies. But then, they keep working at this. And then at one point, like the light bulb goes off and they're like, oh my God, like this is a full-time job. And at that point in time, I think then, they try to build that business justification. I also think that, there are red flags that tend to come up, as time's going by when you have to think about bringing on an enablement person. And some of those things that come to mind for me is, if there's an uptick in onboarding, or if you're talking to your managers and consistently you're hearing that some of your reps are, don't have a specific skill set, or if you're looking at your deals across the funnel and you keep seeing, the same challenges that your reps are running into. So again, whether it's, you have that tipping point with that one person, or you start seeing these problems, to me, that's the time where you build that justification. And I think it's important, you build the justification, you build the description of the job. Here's what I want this person to do. Here's what I don't want this person to do. And I would then also say, to build out that 90-day plan. So when that individual comes on, they have just a clear path of what their priorities and responsibilities are.
It's such an important point about anything that you do in a high growth startup. Choosing what not to do is almost as important as choosing what to do. And I think I'm glad Danielle's here because she can provide an interesting perspective as an operations leader who just spun out some of the enablement work. Danielle, how should we think about this?
Yeah, I think Beverly actually just described my career path. Usually I'm that ops person that comes in and, someone's starting up a sales ops team because the sales team either has grown to that certain level or that the growth path is to have a large enough sales team that you're all in and really need some structure and consistency there. So I've typically come in and to that point as an operational minded person looked at, okay, what is our process? What do we want our process to look like? Where are the gaps in that? Where does it make sense to pull in enablement? I actually, a lot of times will bring enablement right in. At Zappy, I honestly brought in an analyst first because I actually needed a little bit more help understanding what an enablement role might do. So to Beverly's point, I mean, your success in spinning it out of operations is really defining exactly what is enablement, what isn't enablement. And I think something we'll get into a little bit more potentially later on is, and something we're still doing, right? We've spun off sales enablement because we had we talk about intent for selling, but we had a trigger point internally where we're scaling our sales teams and our customer success teams. And it, becomes that really important job to make sure they're set up for success and get the right training and programs in place. But now it's, okay, now what is sales enablement past just onboarding, right? So that team has actually just had 2 hires come in. And the gray area we're still working through is like where we still have a little bit of an umbilical cord per se tied to this is technology enablement. So what is a technology enablement? Because as revenue operations, we own a lot of that tech stack that we're helping optimize those new hires or existing reps to maximize their impact with. So that's the next stage, I'd say, like understanding, yes, we had a need for onboarding and now we're getting into the, sales process optimization, right? Who takes on the project of understanding what a strong proposal process looks like, right? Those are the areas where right now, like saying, okay, well, operations can really help with some of the metrics around that and the tracking of it, but this is an area where enablement really picks up on the sales process optimization piece. So.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into alignment and misalignment. But Sheryl, I know your perspective on this was kind of ops comes first, and then we bring on enablement. How does that evolve in your mind?
Yeah, enablement does mean something different at every company that I've been with. But I think the key for enablement is both people. I heard Beverly and Danielle mention, roles and responsibilities, and what is it that you want enablement to help you do. And you need to have a strong handle on what are your what is your sales process? What is your methodology? And what is your go-to-market strategy? Like, what do you want your salespeople to do and go after the market? And you have a strong grasp of the processes and the tools and what will help your salespeople win. I think you bring enablement in when you need consistency and you need the ability to scale rapidly. Like, consistency is so key to me, because you can hire so many salespeople and you can make your number off the backs of like 20% of your sales force sometimes, but you don't want that to happen. For your organization to grow, scale, and thrive, you need consistent ramp time and productivity delivered by the vast majority of your sales organization every single quarter. So I think as you're scaling faster and you need to ensure that you're going to have verifiable productivity from all the salespeople and they can do what you expect them to do within a certain period of time, that's when you bring in enablement. You make it clear what you want enablement to accomplish. And then enablement, given clear roles and clear goals, can set up tools, content, training, and standardize it in a way that you can ensure that when you hire somebody, assuming you're hiring the people with the right requirements, enablement can take the ball and help that person ramp and can help a group of people all over the world ramp at a rate that will help your business. And you can take all the people that exist and say, what are the gaps? We need everybody to achieve this level. And let's go after what skills and knowledge they need to achieve this and who's best at it. Let's bring that to the whole organization. So there are a lot of levers that enablement can pull to ensure ramp time happens like consistently for every new hire at a certain level. And we can decrease that over time. That's one of my objectives. And then you get a level of productivity from each and every member of the organization. And if that can't happen, then you have clear data on who should leave and you can replace them with somebody that can be productive.
Yeah, I think there's an important, there's a few important points there, right? There's this pressure, oh, we gotta 4X, we're gonna hire a bunch of salespeople and magically they're gonna be productive, right? Now that's where enablement, that's where operations comes in. I want to take this is a great live question. And I want to hand this off to Beverly. Beverly, so this is a question coming in live here around kind of giving some relief to the sales team when maybe the processes and policies, they're not adhering to the stuff that needs to get done. And that could be from a prospecting standpoint, that could be from a process standpoint. How do you make sure that the sales team actually kind of does the stuff they need to do from a process standpoint?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, right? And I think it's a tough one from a few perspectives
$1 million question.
Oftentimes you have your A players that are hitting the number, but they're not following the process, right? So you sort of have to work with them on just education, managing. I find also, explaining this is why we need you to do these processes. This is how it helps, from a broader perspective. It tends to help them in embracing better. So I would say those would be some of the areas that I would work on. And I think too, I always push with especially, my tenured reps or my A players that, people look up to you in the role that you're in, and I need you to be that person that helps me in setting that example. And so oftentimes I find if I take, all of those approaches, I'm able to change those behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective. The other part that I think I would add on that is check your process. I mean, if you've got an onerous process that your reps aren't following, their problem is your process, right? That may not be a sales rep problem. And Danielle, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on designing process appropriately so reps will actually
Definitely tagging ops. Yeah, and I mean, I've also done a lot of enablement in my past. So my path has come up through a lot of the sales enablement. So I do think from an ops perspective, I take a really empathetic look and I try to put myself in their shoes. And that does go to looking at the process and For sure, the A players are usually your worst offenders, and they usually, there's a bit of that internal contract, right? You talk to them about doing a mutual contract with their customers or whatnot. There's a little bit of that. You give them some leniency on some other areas, as long as they, pick up the slack over here on the area where like you really need to understand that data point. The other thing I've done with people that my A players that typically tend to fall a little bit off the structured wagon is understanding what the core base of their process is. So like you might have a rep that does it completely different than you train the best practice, and then you train every other rep's best practice, but understanding the core why of what they're trying to achieve by doing it that way, you can incorporate that actually into the more structured process and actually use their wins with that to enhance your current process. And then from the ops perspective, really making it actionable. So if it's a field update, they just really don't want to go navigate to the opportunity update, or you don't have other tools like some of the new plugins to say, okay, I'm going to quickly update my forecast or close loss reason. We're using Troops right now. So I'm using technology to try to enforce, I need you guys to update this at this point in the process, but you don't have to go search for it somewhere, or you don't have to like, remember to go do it, or look at a stagnant dashboard that's telling you you're out of compliance. I'm going to push this to you, tell you in a nice way you're out of compliance. And then if you don't do it next week, you're going to get a not so nice out of compliance. So that's kind of the ops perspective.
I think there's also in general, and I love the point that Beverly made around like, you have to do a little bit of selling as well when anytime you're rolling out a process, and especially with data. I feel like data entry is a common one where it's like, reps don't put the right stuff in Salesforce. Like, cool, are you doing anything with that? Or are you just putting a bunch of stuff in Salesforce because you want to put a bunch of stuff in Salesforce? It's incumbent upon us as revenue leaders to make sure that that data is turned into insights and the business is driven with those, not just in there because it's in Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our jobs is to help make the reps' lives easier. So we always try to make it so it's the right level of data, it's the right level of administrative effort. And then, yeah, the business has a lot of needs. We need to know what we're attributing to what closed deals. Like, this is how we can figure out how we improve product, or how we improve our assets, or what's being used to get deals done. And how do we learn from that? Why do we win? Why do we lose? We go through a lot of information on why we win and why we lose, and how do we use that to win more or go after the right deals or point our marketing budget somewhere. So it is worthwhile to enter data. But one thing I will call out is I have been to a lot of places where anytime a rep isn't doing anything that you want them to do, it's interpreted as a training problem. Like, Sheryl, go build a training. Our reps are not doing this. Like, not everything can be solved with training. So in terms of like reps putting data into Salesforce, I can teach them how to use the system. That we do when everybody walks in the door. What systems are you going to use? How do you use them? Here's what we do with your information. Managers are an important point for enablement, because we always line up with our VPs, our RDs, and say, okay, how do you want the reps to do this? And then we're going to train them to do it that way. And you're going to need to inspect using all the data that you have and all the dashboards that are very clean and clear and available to you. And you're going to go ask the questions that drive the actual doing in Salesforce of what you want done. So I say there's skill and there's will, and I can help with knowledge and skills, but how things are baked into comp plans and what managers are asking about during their one-on-ones. I mean, we'll teach the managers what we think they should do, but what a manager does, what an RD does, what a VP focuses on, that makes all the difference in the world for what reps do in systems, because a rep is paid to sell. And so we give them as much selling time as we can and try not to impede that, like bigger percentage of selling time for sure. But if there are things the business needs, the manager has to lean in on that and make sure they're inspecting it.
I think there's a lot there. And I think the current research shows that it's something like 66% of an account executive's time is spent not selling. 2/3 of their time is spent not selling. I'm gonna let that
Yeah,
sink in. Again,
sad.
that's insane. And we wonder why attainment on average is about 40% across all SaaS companies. Maybe the sellers aren't selling because they've got a bunch of other stuff they have to do. I wanna move forward just a little bit here and talk about kind of the alignments. We've talked a little bit about operations doing some of the enablement work. When you're looking to align operations and enablement to make sure that they're working like peanut butter and jelly, what are some tips or tricks to make sure that you can drive that alignment? And Beverly, let's have you kick us off here.
Yeah. So I would say, one of the most important things is that you're just understanding roles and responsibilities across the two teams. And I think that they need to be really well defined. And I would say, sometimes when I see that misalignment, I don't see it specifically towards ops and enablement. I see it much broader, that it's, across the organization, there's just this pockets of misalignment. But what I would say from my point of view is, I love my ops team because my ops team makes me more productive, and I'm very conscious of that, and I really appreciate that. And so I would say, and we've talked about this, the four of us earlier, there is a little bit of, healthy friction between us, because I think from my ops perspective, they look specifically at data, and I'm sort of looking at data, but I'm also looking at, sales personalities and process. So I balance that. But I would, think about, when you're working with your ops team, to just make sure that you guys both, know what the priorities are, that we're aligned with sales leadership on those priorities, and that, we're sort of, in constant communication about moving forward on what they're doing, what we're doing, and how that helps, the efficiencies of the sales teams.
Wow, that's the first time I've done that on a panel. I'm muted. There we go. So I think it's an interesting point where there's so many similarities between ops and enablement. It's a one-to-many. It's a very matrixed. But we have the privilege of having Danielle on from the ops side. How have you driven that alignment to work? You mentioned the umbilical cords maybe still connected just a little bit.
Yeah, and that's, I started kind of going into the proposal example, just it's very relevant right now and top of mind, because we have been spending so much time on our onboarding and training over last year. So it's now getting into like, okay, great, we have the right people in place, we have the right structure, we have a solid onboarding. Now, how do we optimize the current process? How do we optimize our current systems? And so understanding that, I think alignment is you're planning your priorities in sync. So if a sales manager or sales enablement person needs to really pull apart a process or understand some data points they might not have, they need to be in lockstep with their ops function to have that planned into priority pulling, right? Or being able to say, hey, by Q3, we need to be able to have a benchmark on this. We are not capturing data that can give us one yet in Q1, Q2, right? Q1, you're implementing, doing discovery. Q2, you're actually capturing. Q3, you can test out a benchmark. Realistically, I know that sounds like a long time, but it really, like, that's actually short term. It's kind of like truncating, I think, some of that. But when you're moving fast, that actually is moving fast. And I think you get the misalignment when misalignment, at least personally, has been coming from more so, who do I go to for what? Which goes to Beverly's idea on, like, you need to have clear ownership, clear roles and responsibilities. It's actually something I've actively been working on the last 3 weeks with my new manager, is like, what does ops do and what don't we do? What are we going to eject from, right? And it's hard for me because my whole background in this space, enablement has always sat very close to my team, on my team, or myself, right? So there's some elements of that I'm gonna have to kind of like get comfortable trusting and delegating off. But as long as you have those clear roles and responsibilities, I think you avoid it, and you get misalignment when you're actually making it more difficult for your customers who are end users, so your internal customers, to really navigate your process, navigate your company. I think that's when you see the biggest misalignment, is if we're not setting them up for success. So.
Yeah, I think I think it's great, and the perspective that you bring, Danielle, is very unique. And we actually got a question specifically for you as a RevOps leader. What do you value in an enablement leader, or what do you look for from a quality of that would make somebody successful?
Yeah, so probably coming from more of a process-oriented mindset. What I find really in a successful enablement leader, right? That's what it was at actual. Like if I'm working with or hiring in a valuable enablement leader, it's someone who can really help understand, feel, and help us add clarity to where our gaps or pain points are for our internal team. So they can put together really clear programs, right? So as you've heard Sheryl and Beverly mention, like enablement can be many different things. So what I really value, especially in a scaling company where you don't have 10 enablement people potentially, you might have 1 or 2, is having really clear lines of your programs, which is very ops focused. It's almost like project management for your enablement. And you're having very clear timelines across those programs and roadmaps. So your enablement might have a training and onboarding program. It might have a technology stack program. It might have a process or cross-functional, right? And taking those and understanding like, what does the roadmap for each of those look like? And then working cross-functionally with that. I think that's what I look for, is someone who is not only empathetic also to our customers, but also the cross-functional teams they need to work with. So is empathetic to ops too, because I think ops and enablement are those fun worlds where like you can scope creep really fast. And all of a sudden you think you have like these 3 projects you're working on all quarter, and you're like at the end of the quarter, you're like, I didn't do any of those, but I got these 10 other things done. I feel like we do share that in common a lot. So having someone that can be empathetic back towards their partners too, not just our internal stakeholders. So
yeah, it's a little bit of the island of misfit toys.
I like to call ops and enablement kind of linking arms together, the miscellaneous bin. We have a problem with something. You guys go solve this. Like I have to say, like my ops leader is my best friend in everything we do, because both of our teams are focused on the same thing. We want sales to be as productive as possible, as fast as possible. And we have specific OKRs and issues for our sales and customer success organizations. I'll call it our revenue organization, where we put our heads together and try to figure out how to solve for what we're trying to solve for. And it does involve a lot of working together. And if something is about who's doing what, we sit down and we say, hey, this needs to get done. It's not, super clear. There's not a hard and fast line. So we just sit down and say, we need to get this done. Who's doing what? What's the best way to do it? Who are our people that we can link together? A lot of times we partner up our people. And yeah, I am super lucky. I have the biggest team now that I've ever had. I have been a 1-person enablement show. I've had like 2 people reporting to me, and we had to cover the whole organization. So I know exactly what you're saying, Danielle. Like if you have 2 people, you have to be a lot of jack of all trades. But the good news is between ops and enablement, then you like double your power, because it's like you need to solve a problem. Who has the knowledge and skills to help figure this out? How do we solve it? What are the best options? And then how do we execute? I don't find we're ever misaligned, just because we're all about what are the goals of the top line organization? What are our goals in net retention? And how do we work together and make sure we hit those goals, suss out the people that aren't contributing as much, and figure out how to bump them back up and ramp them to the level of productivity we want. So we look at a lot of data together and do a lot of problem solving together. And I think that really helps. I see my favorite topic called like KPIs and metrics. So really, I see you trying to say something though, and I don't want to cut you off.
No, I was going to say my observation too is when I'm working with companies that have a very small ops and enablement team, that oftentimes it's the ops people that, because they're looking more closely at the data, they have a pulse on what the problems are going to be in the future. And so they give that enablement person that heads up to, then start thinking about how they're going to solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So Richard, where do you want to go next? Do you want to?
There's so many different directions that we can
KPIs
take
and
it.
metrics.
There's so many different directions. I love it. I said we have about 6 hours worth of content. I think what would make sense. So we've talked a lot about the alignment. We've talked about ways to kind of set people up for success. Let's double click into some of the metrics because I think that's an interesting one, or KPIs. And Sheryl, let's start with you on this one. Just looking at thinking of like, how do you know when's the right time to bring in enablement? How do you know it's working? One of the most common questions we get in modern sales pros in the community is like, I know I need enablement. How do I justify it? And then once it's there, how does it justify its existence? Which is a super, super short answer, I'm sure.
That's really good linkage. And I'd say it depends on the organization. Like, how do you know? Like when you are at the point where you have like a more complex selling motion or a team that's grown, you have different roles. You have BDRs, you have account managers, you have solution architects and solution engineers, and you have professional services, customer success people. When you need to line those people up and help them all be productive and working together as a team, and when you need to scale relatively quickly using the best practices that exist, that's a really good time to hire enablement. And I will tell you, the justification for enablement is your whole team should get more and more and more productive over time. Like I like the 80% at 80% or greater rule. So we have lots of metrics. We have adoption metrics, we have impact metrics. If I can clearly show, which I do, that I reduce salespeople ramp up times to productivity, whatever that definition is for an organization, if I can reduce the time it takes for anybody to ramp, that's dollars. Like if they are ramped and productive after 60 days instead of after 120 days, that's dollars. Dollars. And if I can get 80% above 80%, if today you're 50% of the people above 80% of whatever their quota is, when I ramp consistency, that's dollars right back to the organization too. And then you have a methodology for scaling everybody using the programs that drove those numbers.
I love that the 80% at 80% is such such an important thing. Beverly, I know you get to see this from not only being a practitioner at a sales enablement organization, but you also work with a whole variety of companies on this problem. What are some of the metrics or KPIs that you would say enablement needs to be focused on, or that you can use to measure the success of enablement?
So I would echo what Cheryl's saying. I think what you have to do is you have to look at your sales cycle, and you need to identify in your sales cycle, where you're having hiccups. And, those hiccups could be, we're losing deals to competition. We're losing deals. We're not creating urgency. We're at the wrong level. My reps, don't understand process or sales stages. And so you can, with any of those metrics, start measuring and applying different training and curriculum to change those types of behaviors. I also think, Sheryl mentioned, when you think about onboarding, if you can just decrease onboarding from a specific period of time, what is the impact then, across the organization? I also, if you look at it on the flip side, if you have reps, that have been there for 9 or 12 months and they're still struggling, what's going to be the impact when those people leave because you haven't set them up for success, and or you have to, hire another person. So, that's another way that we can positively impact, over a longer period of time. So I would, look at all of those different metrics and determine, here's what's happening, today, here's the outcome we're hoping to achieve. What can we use from both leading and lagging indicators to measure that, and then track your success.
I think an important and overlooked point that that Beverly made there is the cost of replacing an account executive. It's I think it's about 8 months end to end is what it will take in time to get them from, okay, cool, we're going to put this person on a PIP. Then we have to hire, we have to go through the hiring process. We have to get somebody on, we have to onboard them and all of that. And I think that's a long time. And if you can deploy enablement effectively to get that person more productive, or not put them in a situation where you've got to put them on a PIP or manage them out of the organization, it's huge. Danielle, I want to actually ask kind of the same question your way, because you've probably got a little bit of a different lens on it. But when you were thinking about like, hey, this is how we know ops is going to be successful, any KPIs or metrics or things that you're thinking about there?
So specifically for our ops, and then actually going into even like, it's gonna almost say another alignment area, right? Is like around KPIs and metrics, right? A big responsibility that my team has is making sure my enablement team has got the right data points to be able to benchmark any of this, right? We actually just brought in Atrium for our ongoing rep benchmarking, but also our, we never had ramp metrics, right? We've been spending so much time training reps that we haven't actually looked at like metrics that tell us what good training fully looks like, which sounds silly after I'm talking about like spinning off enablement, but when you're moving fast, we're just trying to get reps through that right now. Now we have a chance to understand over last year when we have the right profile coming in, what does good look like? We actually have we had to figure out what the right sales profile was for us, honestly, in the new structure before benchmarks really made sense, because it wasn't apples to apples. Now we're bringing in the tools, starting to capture the data points we might not have been looking at before so that we can get those benchmarks. And then a more qualitative thing we look at is satisfaction. Could be because we're a survey company, but we're sending out, my team sends out a quarterly survey every quarter to understand, like, it's largely around Salesforce because that's the foundational tool of our stack. But like, how do you like working in this? Where are your challenges? How much, like, how would you rate yourself as a user, advanced or beginner or whatnot? And that's the metrics we look at. Actually, like, really exciting to see over last year was beginning of the year, we had about, what was it, like 13% said like under average for feeling comfortable in Salesforce. And by the fourth quarter, we had no one in that bucket. So to me, that's positive improvement. That's us listening to them. That's us delivering on what they need, not what we thought would be cool improvements, which is also a big pitfall, I think, especially when you have really smart enablement ops folks who know what we should be doing. Sometimes the things you want to be doing and should be doing are not necessarily aligned with what you need to do now. And that's where like the gap analysis comes in, right? Like, I'm a big fan of understanding, like, where's the pain? What are we not doing that we should be doing? Then the big thing I think you get stuck with is a lot of the, we're still doing that we shouldn't be doing, right? Which I think benchmarks help with that as well. Like, we tried activity benchmarks that didn't really go anywhere because we didn't have enough backup data for them to understand, like, you're on this ranking of activities last week, but that means what, right? So if you don't give them enough of that correlation with those benchmarks as well, it's hard to really to kind of first point I think Richard made, like, if you're not helping them understand how you're using the data and the benchmarks, you're not going to get that adoption, and you're not going to get excitement for your programs you're running as an enablement folks, or the process you put together as a ops folks. So
I think that there's probably a whole conversation to have just around the data and the interoperation between setting up good metrics and looking at precursors and all of that. We're starting to take questions here live, folks. We've got about 10 minutes or so left with our panelists, so keep them coming in. This is a great question. I want to start with Sheryl on this, and then Beverly and Danielle, please weigh in. Thinking about a global organization, how would you recommend setting up, or any thoughts on breaking up enablement maybe by region or time zone? I'm sure I know you've got a pretty big team, so how do you think about that?
So this is a great question, because this is what I was able to do to a certain extent with a couple of more head count. this is hard. And I am in an organization that has 3 distinct geos with 3 distinct leaders and ways of doing business. And that is how the business was built. So all of my people engage with all of the geo leaders on a regular basis for their functions, the functions that they support. They regularly meet with people and evaluate how are things going. Here's what I'm seeing. What do you need? Every geo, it makes it really hard. That said, I was able to add a delivery person, like training delivery, for our international team. So having a delivery person in Americas and another delivery person in international makes a huge difference. The rest of my team does run and manage global programs. I have 2 people who happen to be in Europe, in Amsterdam. So anything the EMEA team needs, I can allocate to those 2 people, which is great. But the vast majority of my team has to build programs for global. And then each geo may need a slightly different version of that program for sure. And they may want to use it a little bit differently, but I have to build like a single, I have to marry what every geo needs and do the highest levels of priority and what's going to make the biggest difference. But we do unique programs for each geo sometimes. I do hit each one. So there's a mix and it's important. I will say when I was at Citrix, we did have a model that started with regional enablement teams, and then we weren't getting a level of efficiency. So we said, there are certain things that you can build globally to get to the 80%. And then each geo team would take the 80% and add the 20% that made it unique to that geo. So I think that's the best model if you can do it. You have a bunch of people who do global programs based on best practices in your go-to-market. And then if you have a person that can focus on how you leverage that global content or program for each geo or help with some unique geo needs, that to me is the ideal. You have somebody that can help with the unique geo things, but that should be like your 20%, not your 80%. Yeah, I have actually aligned my team by role. So I have like solution architect, enablement people that build content and deliver programs. And I have a person that's entirely dedicated to partner enablement, and they serve the global partner community, working with every team and every geo. But on the training delivery side, it is very helpful to have instructors in each geo. I've got 2, so my West Coast person can help cover APJ, or my EMEA person can help cover APJ. So you can share that. It still works, even if you don't have one geo covered with an instructor.
I love the way that you're set up, Cheryl, because I think it really addresses, the challenges in each of the regions. And to me, I think it's, super important that in our roles, we realize that, change is always going to happen, and that there are nuances within, each of the selling regions. So it sounds like that's given, your team the ability to really pivot quickly and to address, those sales requirements. So, prior to hearing how you were set up, I would have echoed, the same arrangement. I do think it takes, a lot of time and process in order to accomplish that, but that it is making your sales teams most successful.
I think it's an interesting concept, right, Cheryl, looking at it kind of horizontally instead of maybe regionally. I love it. So another question that we talked about just a little bit, but I'd love to get the panelists kind of answers on this. Just to put a fine point on it, when is the right moment or the right time to bring on enablement? I know, Cheryl, you've had some thoughts on this, but any rules of thumb for people on this? Because that's a common question that we get asked, like, when's the right time to do it? But any rules of thumb, Cheryl? And then we'll go Cheryl, Danielle, and Beverly on that.
The right time for enablement, it is when you have like clear objectives and clear roles and responsibilities. And you can see that like the sales managers cannot just do it themselves. I think every organization is different. I keep saying that. And like the needs of 100% digital selling organization are different than like your traditional field sales organization. So varies in timing. But timing wise, I would say when you've hit, I like Beverly's example from earlier, you know, somewhere around when you have like 50 sellers might be a good time to think about, because then you can justify like, I can increase productivity of like the bulk of those 50 sellers. And the other thing is if you're about to grow big and you really need somebody entirely focused on making sure that that growth happens in a way that you don't leave people behind in the process. So if you're growing your org, if you're adding new functions, if your sales process is going to be complex, and it's really important to get consistency in using best practices, those are all really good reasons to hire a full-time sales enablement person. And I would absolutely hire kind of a more senior level practitioner who can do a lot of things like build training, deliver training, help you put systems and tools in place. Like Beverly has a tool called Brainshark that is a tool that you could decide to use. But you need a learning management system. You need a content management system to help you scale. You need somebody that can do a lot of different things and execute as your first person. That would be my advice. Don't hire a junior level person as your first hire. Hire somebody that can go do a lot of different things and do them well.
That's a great perspective. Danielle, what was it that made the decision at Zappy to actually spin out, right? What was the moment where you're like, nope, we gotta hire somebody full-time to do this?
Yeah, so I think kind of going with Cheryl's thoughts on like, it was bandwidth, right? So I started Zappy a little over 2 years ago, and it was myself and a Salesforce admin. And we're still rebranding what is revenue operations. And then the next hire I was supposed to have was enablement, but something I really like to live by. And I've been in a unfortunate career scenario where I didn't have a lot of choice around it, but I don't like to throw people or systems at a problem. I like to understand what the problem is and what the right skill set or right system or tool set might look like to solve that problem. So we actually brought in more of an analyst function at first, and then hired into sales enablement because we needed to understand a little bit more about what the hell the sales structure, sales process really looked like before we had someone that could come in and make it consistent, streamline, scale it, make sure our new hires came in and understood the why and how to interact with them. We also, to Cheryl's point on complex sale, our product offering got a lot more complex. You know, you can't just throw someone at some one-pagers or some pre-recorded trainings and say, go learn our products, right? So we needed someone who could be a really strong liaison with our product team because we hadn't had product marketing yet. So those are the areas where like, there's some really foundational functions you need before enablement can actually be successful, in my opinion and in my background. But you know, like having someone that on product could start speaking value prop to the enablement person who could then turn that into sales speak, right? That's the type of liaison enablement can really be. And talking about values, I say in enablement, right? Communicative and really like partnering internally just as much as ops partners internally. And then now spinning that out into sales. So the sales enablement function, which we actually called revenue activation, which I thought is interesting. I want to put that out there. I don't know. We're going through some new like naming schemas because why jump on the wagon of every other buzzword? No. But so revenue activation team, we were scaling our sales team. So like being closer to sales leadership was more important for the strategic roadmap for enablement, whereas revenue operations is really more consolidating to our more internal operations teams because we have a big need for a closer eye and strategies around internal customer journey optimization, not just external. So having enablement work through with the sales and customer success directly, and having operations focus on the system, process, data, and metrics. So I think when you have like that clear, I think we've all talked about this, right? You need the focus first, you need the roadmap first, then you can make those decisions.
I hate to say it, gang. We're at time. We're actually a little bit over where we want it to be, unsurprisingly. Great insights. But what I want to do is we start to wrap here, just take a second, panelists, and think about everything we've talked about today, our topics on alignment, hiring, and all of that, and think through one key takeaway that you want our audience to go with. And Beverly, let's start with you. One key takeaway for our audience here. I know it's tough to distill an hour down into a couple sentences.
The one thing I love that Danielle talked about was when she talked about the tech stack. And, you know, in most organizations, the tech stack does sit under operations, but it has such a correlation to sales enablement. And I think that if you're working with your ops people and can just think about how to get more adoption and to, you know, work just the training of that tech stack more cohesively, that you would just see this huge ripple across your organization of success. So it made me really think about going back and having a deeper conversation with my ops people about what we're doing with the tech stack and just how to train better on it.
Danielle, one key takeaway.
I'm going to steal it from the cheerleader herself, Sheryl. Clear roles and clear goals. It was the first quote I put into the chat. It's going to stick with me. And I think that was the biggest theme of today, right? Like, have a really clear focus and understanding of what enablement is driving, what programs do they actually run and what don't they run, and why are they running them, right? That's that goal piece. So like, if there's not a why or outcome of why you're doing it, you shouldn't be doing it in the first place, right? So I really like that, clear roles and clear goals. So thank you, Sheryl.
Sheryl?
I like how Danielle made it into a rhyme. But I think for me, the most important thing we talked about today is we're all working together in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. So everybody around us, operations, enablement, product marketing, like all of our goals are, let's help sales be successful. Let's help customer success be successful. What does it look like when we're successful? How do we look at it? How do we measure when we're successful? Let's have targets, you know, going back to Danielle's clear goals. I'm big on numbers. I told you I was a math geek too, but how do we evolve human performance and like solving problems and working together on human performance and actual results and helping the most possible people be successful? Like, that's exciting. And that's why I love working with operations, product marketing, learning and development. Like, we're all one big team. And as long as we're focused on the same problems together, we can accomplish so many things. It's 1 + 1 = 3.
I gotta say, I knew we weren't gonna get to everything. I feel like we've already got to get the option for the second event on the books. This was phenomenal. So much great information shared in such a short period of time. Sheryl, Danielle, Beverly, I know you're all incredibly busy. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with everybody here today. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And on behalf of the team behind the scenes, Taylor, and on behalf of the MSP community, I really do want to thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Beverly.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody. Bye-bye.